What would you do if you had spent an hour alone at a candlelit table for two, watched your date walk in, look you up and down, mutter that he had not realized how big you were in person, and leave without sitting down? Then, before the shame could swallow you whole, the most dangerous man in the restaurant crossed the room, pulled out the empty chair, and said, loud enough for everyone still staring, "His loss is my treasure." The whole room had watched her be abandoned. She had felt every eye on her, the pity and the amusement, as she reached for her water glass. With a hand she was fighting to keep steady, deciding whether to run to the bathroom and cry, or simply pay for the wine she had not touched and disappear. And then a shadow fell across the table, and a chair scraped, and a man, whose name emptied rooms, sat down across from her as though he had been invited, and looked at her the way no one had ever looked at her in her life. This is a story of hidden worth, public humiliation turned to triumph, and the ruthless man who decided in one glance that the woman the whole world had just discarded was the most valuable thing in the room. Serafina Vaughn had learned, a long time ago, that the safest thing a woman her size could do is expect nothing and apologize for existing. She was 30, soft and generously curved, with a lovely open face and warm dark eyes, and a smile she had trained herself to make smaller over the years, because she had learned that a big woman who takes up joy the way she takes up space makes certain people uncomfortable. She had agreed to the date out of a loneliness. She was ashamed of a man she had spoken to for 3 weeks who had seemed kind, and she had worn her best dress and arrived early and waited, and when he came and looked at her and left, it had confirmed the thing she had spent her whole life being told, which was that a woman like her was something to be endured in private and never chosen in public. What none of the people watching her humiliation understood was what Serafina actually was underneath the softness they had already dismissed. Because Serafina Vaughn had a mind that never stopped working, a quiet, formidable intelligence that she had learned to keep hidden because the world did not want it from a woman who looked like her. She was a structural engineer, one of the best in the city, a person who could look at a building and feel where it was weak, who understood load and stress and failure the way other people understood gossip, who had spent a career watching men present her calculations as their own, because clients did not trust a soft-spoken heavy woman with the things that held their towers up. She had a memory that held every number she had ever run, and an eye that saw the hidden fault line in anything, and she had buried all of it under a small apologetic smile, because being brilliant had never once made the world kinder to her. And on the night everything changed. She sat abandoned at a table for two, and the most dangerous man on the coast watched the whole thing happen, and decided he had seen enough. The man was Gabriel Thorne, and he was the reason rooms had temperatures. He was tall and broad, and dressed in a charcoal suit cut with lethal precision, the head of a syndicate that owned the ports and the freight lines, and the fear of every powerful family for 100 miles. And he was rumored to end a life. He rarely raised his voice. He never needed to. He had been at a corner table conducting quiet business, and he had watched over the rim of a glass of amber whiskey the entire small tragedy unfold. The woman arriving early and hopeful, the smoothing of the dress, the slow dimming of that hopeful face as the minutes passed, and then the man arriving, and the ugly look, and the muttered cruelty. And the walking away. He had watched the woman not cry, which interested him because most people would have. He had watched her square her shoulders and reach for her water with a hand that shook and lift her chin against a room full of pity. And Gabriel Thorne, who had spent his whole life surrounded by people, performing courage they did not have. He set down his glass. He crossed the room, and the entire restaurant, which had been enjoying the woman's humiliation, went silent as the most dangerous man any of them would ever see pulled out the empty chair across from her and sat. Serafina looked up in alarm, certain this was some new cruelty, some final joke. He did not smile. He simply looked at her, and then he turned his head slowly and let his cold gaze travel across every table that had been staring, until one by one they found somewhere else to look. His loss, he said, in a voice pitched to carry to every ear still listening, is my treasure. Serafina could not speak. The man across from her, whoever he was, had just said the most extraordinary sentence anyone had ever aimed at her, and he had said it to the whole room. He signaled the waiter without looking away from her. "We will start again," he said quietly. Only to her, "Now you waited an hour for a man who did not deserve to look at you. Let me buy you the dinner you actually came for. And if at the end of it you never wish to see me again, my driver will take you home, and I will trouble you no further." But I could not sit in that corner and watch this city fail to see what was sitting in the middle of it. And Serafina Vaughn, who had spent 30 years being unchosen, sat across from a stranger the whole room feared and felt, for the first time in her life, unmistakably seen. She did not know that she had just been seen by the most dangerous man on the coast, or that he did not ever look away from something once he had decided it was his. They talked for 3 hours. She kept waiting for the cruelty, the hook, the moment his kindness would reveal its price, and it never came. He asked her what she did, and when she said she was an engineer, he did not do the thing everyone did, the flicker of surprise, the recalibration. He simply asked her a real question about it, and then another, and when she found herself explaining, with more animation than she had allowed herself in years, why a certain famous bridge had been doomed from its blueprints, he watched her with an attention so complete it made her breath catch. Nobody had ever listened to her like that. Nobody had ever looked at her while she was being clever and seemed to find it the most compelling thing in the world. And when the evening ended, he did exactly what he had promised, walked her to a car, gave the driver her address, and said good night, and did not ask for anything at all. And Serafina went up to her apartment and sat in the dark shaken because a man everyone feared had treated her like something precious and asked for nothing in return. And she did not know what to do with a kindness that had no teeth. She found out who he was the next morning, and it frightened her, and it did not stop him, because Gabriel Thorne, having decided, did not undecide. He did not overwhelm her. He sent, the next day, not flowers, but a book, a rare engineering text she had mentioned once in passing, with a note in a hard, slanting hand that said, "Only because you should have things that were made for the way your mind works." And the day after that he asked, through a careful intermediary, whether she would have dinner with him again, in a private room this time, not to hide her, but so that she would never again eat under the eyes of people who did not deserve to watch her. She said yes. She told herself it was curiosity. It was not curiosity. And so began the slow unfolding of a woman who had spent her whole life making herself smaller, because Gabriel Thorne did the one thing no one had ever done, which was to keep making room for more of her. He asked her opinion and used it. When she mentioned offhand that the security renovations on one of his properties were structurally unsound, he had his people pull the plans and discovered she was right, and he looked at her afterward as though she had hung the moon. He put her at his side in public and dared the world to say a word about her body, and the world, looking at what stood beside her, did not dare. And Seraphina began to take up space. She stopped shrinking her smile. Every evening they sat over a decanter of amber whiskey. He poured for himself, and a glass of red he poured for her, and he told her about the father he had buried, and the trust he had learned to bury with him. Things he had said to no one. He learned she flinched at raised voices and softened at kindness, and it made him want to burn down every person who had ever taught her to apologize for existing. And one night at her door, his hand rose to cradle her jaw, his thumb brushing her cheek, and Seraphina, who had spent her whole life braced for rejection, looked at his open face and did not flinch, and he saw it. But Seraphina, being Seraphina, had started to notice something about one of his buildings that had nothing to do with romance, and it would not let her rest. The cruelty came at a formal gathering, and it arrived wearing the confidence of a woman who had never been left at a table in her life. Gabriel had brought Seraphina in a gown of deep emerald that celebrated every curve she had spent 30 years apologizing for, and midway through the evening, a sleek, beautiful woman named Isadora, who had spent 2 years positioning herself to be the next Mrs. Thorne cornered her by the terrace doors with an audience in tow. "Oh, I have heard about you," Isadora said brightly, loud enough for the room, letting her eyes travel over Seraphina's body with theatrical sympathy. "The restaurant girl? He does love a charity project." She smiled like a blade. "It is very sweet, but you must understand how men like Gabriel work. He saw a chance to look magnanimous in a room full of people, and he took it. That is all you were. A gesture. When the novelty wears off, he will want a woman who belongs on his arm, and nobody, and I mean nobody, looks at a girl your size and sees a queen." The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees, and the old Seraphina would have absorbed it, made her smile small, slipped away to compose herself. But something had been rebuilt in her over those weeks, and she did not lower her eyes. "You are right that he first saw me in a room full of people," Seraphina said, her voice quiet and perfectly level, "which taught me to pay attention to who is watching, and I have been watching this house all evening, Isadora. And I have noticed, for example, that the new East Wing everyone is so proud of has a load-bearing wall that was moved during the renovation, and that the man who signed off on that change has been in your company 3 times tonight." She tilted her head. "I am a structural engineer. I can see exactly where a thing has been made weak, and by whom. So do be careful whose queen you insult. She might be the only person here who can tell that this house is about to fail." The silence had teeth. Isadora did not understand it. But a man, standing just past her shoulder, went the color of ash, and Gabriel, who had crossed the floor in silence, took Seraphina's hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles in front of the entire gathering. "You never make yourself small in this house again, Tesoro," he murmured, using the endearment for the first time. "Not in my world, and never in front of me." But the man who had gone pale understood exactly what the engineer had just said, because he had been the one to sign off on the change, and he had assumed, as everyone always assumed, that the plus-size woman on the boss's arm was decoration and nothing more. The man was Silvano, Gabriel Thorne's consigliere, and he had built his betrayal into the very bones of the house. For 2 years, Silvano had been preparing to hand the family to a rival, and he had chosen a method no one would ever think to look for because everyone watches the money and the men, and no one watches the walls. The East Wing renovation, which Silvano had overseen, was not merely cosmetic. He had used it to move a load-bearing wall and to build, behind a false partition, a hidden access that let a rival's people into the heart of the fortress unseen, and to weaken the structure at a precise point, so that on the night of the planned strike, a single charge could bring down the wing where Gabriel slept and make an assassination look like a tragic collapse. It had been perfect, because who examines the walls of a house everyone assumes is a fortress. And then Gabriel had brought home a structural engineer and seated her at his right hand, and she had looked at the proud new East Wing and felt the wrongness in it the way she felt the wrongness in everything before she had even been told to look. Silvano smiled, thin and cold, and began very quietly to plan. It was the last mistake he would ever make as a free man. Serafina brought it to Gabriel that night, and she brought it the way she brought everything, completely, and with the certainty of a woman who did not guess about load and stress, but knew. She had gone through the East Wing renovation plans, the ones Silvano had signed, and her trained eye did not lie. A load-bearing wall relocated with no compensating structure, which no competent engineer would ever permit, and which served no purpose except to create a weakness. A false partition enclosing a void that appeared on no original plan, sized, she realized with a chill, exactly like a passage, and a single column at the structural heart of the wing that had been quietly compromised during the work, cut and sleeved in a way that would hold under normal load, but would fail catastrophically under a shock, bringing down the entire wing and the master suite above it in seconds. She laid it out on the table without drama, in order, and then she said the thing that made Gabriel go white, which was that the compromised column sat directly beneath the room where he slept. And Gabriel Thorne went very still. Then he did the thing that undid her completely. He believed her instantly. He did not ask her twice. He did not send for an architect to confirm what a woman had said. He looked at a case built from load calculations and a false partition and a single sabotaged column assembled by a woman the world had discarded at a dinner table, and said, quietly, "Silvano." "Yes," said Serafina. Then he took her face in his hands and said, "If I move on him and he sees it coming, he will not wait for his night. He will bring the wing down early, and he will not care who is in it, and the person he will most want under it is the one who saw the fault." And neither of them knew that Silvano had already made that decision. The fortress went dark at 2:30. Serafina woke to a silence so complete it pressed against her skin, and every instinct a lifetime of feeling for the hidden weakness in things had honed, screamed that something was catastrophically wrong. The power was out. The generators stayed dead. Gabriel had been drawn out at midnight to a meeting she now understood was a fabrication. And Serafina, sitting up in the dark, knew with terrible certainty that they had come while he was away, and that they had come for her, and that they meant to do it in the East Wing, where a compromised column and a single charge could bury her under a collapse that would look like an accident. She did not scream. She did not faint. She did not run blindly. She thought, cold and clear, the way she always had when everyone else saw a solid wall, and she alone could see the fault running through it. 2 floors below, a silenced weapon coughed, and a body, met the marble. And Serafina Vaughn did the thing that no one in that house, friend or enemy, had ever thought to account for, because she was the one person alive who understood exactly how that building was meant to kill, and therefore exactly how it could be turned. She did not run from the East Wing. She understood, with the terrible clarity of her whole profession, that the men had come to herd her there, to put her beneath the compromised column when the charge went, and that her survival depended on refusing to be where the building was designed to fail. She moved through the dark by memory and by the feel of the structure itself, and she went first to a service room where a hardwired line ran on its own circuit and got one message out. Then she did the thing only she could do. She went to the false partition she had found in the plans, the hidden passage Silvano had built for the rival's men. And she used the one tool an engineer always understands, which is that a structure has weaknesses its builder did not intend. She knew where the partition was weakest because she knew how it had been built, and she collapsed it inward across the passage mouth, sealing the hidden route the intruders were counting on, so that the men who had crept in through Silvano's secret door found themselves trapped in a dead space between two walls, with no way forward. She heard them start to shout, and then she heard the unhurried footsteps of Silvano, who had not gone into the passage, who understood the building well enough to know exactly what she had just done to it. "Serafina," he said pleasantly into the dark, "extraordinary. I built this wing to fall, and you have turned it into a cage." He was moving carefully now. "Do you know, in 20 years, I never once considered the possibility that the danger would be a woman who reads walls. We watch for spies and rivals, and never for the engineer on the boss's arm." He paused. "But you have made one mistake tonight. You have sealed my men in the passage." "Yes." "But the charge under the master wing is still live, and you are still standing in a building I designed to come down, and I am between you and every safe way out." And Serafina Vaughn, standing in the dark, with her heart steady and her mind moving faster than his, did the one thing he never expected, because she understood his building better than he did. "You have made the mistake, Silvano," she said.
Silence.
"You think you are standing in the building you designed," she said. "But I have spent 3 weeks reading what you did to these walls, and here is what you never understood, because you are a man who breaks things, and I am a woman who knows why they hold. Your charge was set to drop a column under a specific load. An hour ago, I braced that column. It will not fall the way you built it to. And if you detonate now, the collapse will run backward into the passage where your own men are trapped, and into the corridor where you are standing, and not into the empty suite where you thought I would be." She let it settle in the dark. "You built a trap and handed the only person who could read it a 3-week head start. I did not disarm your bomb, Silvano. I turned your whole building against you, the same way you tried to turn it against him." Silvano said nothing, which was the closest thing to a concession she would ever get. And in that silence, the front gates below exploded inward with the tortured shriek of an engine pushed past its limits. Gabriel had come home. Time seemed to fracture. Gunfire. Silvano turned toward the sound, and in the dark of a wing that no longer behaved the way he had built it to, he stepped exactly wrong. And Serafina, who had spent 3 weeks memorizing every altered inch of that structure, moved past him to the reinforced doorway she knew would hold, and was through it and sealing it before he understood she had moved. And then the corridor beyond flooded with light, and Gabriel filled it, soaked in rain, his eyes wild and searching. Dino, his loyal lieutenant, poured in behind him with 4 armed men, and the trap Silvano had spent 2 years building snapped shut around him instead. Gabriel had him by the throat against the wall before he could speak. 20 years, he said. You built me a house and rigged it to be my grave, and when a woman saw it, you came for her. Then he turned his head, and the murderous cold in his eyes dissolved into raw, naked fear, and he released Silvano to Dino's men and crossed to Serafina in 2 strides. His hands moved frantically over her arms, her face, her shoulders, checking for blood, for wounds, for any harm to what was his. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "Did he touch you? Look at me. Breathe. Tell me." "I'm all right," Serafina wept, her fingers twisting in his soaked coat. "I braced his column and sealed his men in their own secret passage. You are going to need a very good structural engineer to fix this wing." Gabriel let out a broken, disbelieving laugh into her hair, and then he framed her tear-streaked face in his trembling hands and looked at her the way no one in her whole overlooked life had ever looked at her. "You are magnificent," he breathed. 20 years he stood beside me and built my death into my own walls. And you felt it the moment you walked into the room." And then his voice cracked open entirely. "Do you know what I understood? The night I watched a man leave you at a table," he said hoarsely, "I watched the whole room decide you were nothing. And I watched you refuse to agree with them, and I have never in my life wanted anything. The way I wanted to sit down in that empty chair," he pressed his forehead to hers, his loss to sorrow. "My treasure, I meant it as a sentence, and it turned out to be the truest thing I know. Silvano, the man who had smiled at Gabriel Thorne for 20 years while building his tomb, learned the price of underestimating her before the week was out. Gabriel did not act in blind rage. He let Serafina lay the whole of it before the commission, the moved wall, the hidden passage, the sabotaged column set to bury a sleeping man and call it an accident, all of it read from the bones of the house by a woman that world had thrown away in a restaurant. And when the 5 families had seen the evidence, and the rival house that had planned to walk through Silvano's secret door was exposed along with him, Serafina did not counsel death. "You do not need to make him a martyr," she said quietly. "You need to make him nothing." So they did it her way. They stripped Silvano of every asset and exposed 2 years of treason to the very families he had schemed to serve, and cast him out, alive, bankrupt, disgraced, a man whose name became a warning whispered on every job site and in every back room on the coast. A fate, the old men agreed, was far crueler than any quick and merciful bullet. And Isadora, who had said that nobody looks at a girl her size and sees a queen, discovered that the man she had been seen with 3 times that night was the very one who had signed off on Silvano's sabotage and spent a long and humiliating season answering questions she could not answer well. And afterward, watched from the far end of every table, Serafina now sat at the head of. As for the man who had left her at a table for 2, he heard, eventually, whose treasure he had walked away from, and understood far too late exactly what his cruelty had cost him. And Serafina, when she thought of him at all, which was almost never, felt nothing but a clean and distant gratitude that he had shown her what he was before she wasted a single kindness on him. Months later, on a bright morning washed gold with new sun, Serafina Vaughn stood on the terrace of the rebuilt East Wing, which she had personally redesigned to be the soundest structure on the coast. and she did not make herself small for anyone anymore. She wore rich colors tailored to celebrate every curve she had spent 30 years apologizing for, and she took up exactly as much room as she pleased, and she smiled without shrinking it. Gabriel came out and stopped, simply to watch her. "You're staring, Mr. Thorne," she said, a smile in her voice. "I will never stop," he said, crossing to her and taking her hands. "Do you know what I understood? The night I sat down at your table," he said quietly. "A whole restaurant looked at the most remarkable woman I had ever seen and decided she was too much, and she sat there and refused to believe them, even while they watched." He tilted her chin up, his dark eyes soft, in a way the rest of the world would never see. "They taught you that a woman your size was something a man settles for in the dark, tesoro. And you turned out to be the only person alive who could see the death built into my own house and stop it. You were never too much. You were simply more than any of them had the sense to want. His loss, my treasure." She looked up at the man the whole city feared, a man who bowed to no one, and yet bowed entirely to her. And for the first time in her life, she believed she was exactly enough. She had spent 30 years being told she was too big to be chosen out loud, something to be endured and never celebrated, discarded at a table for two in front of a room that agreed. And she had proven every last one of them wrong because the brilliant mind the world had refused to see, the eye that found the fault in anything, had saved an empire and a life. A man had left her at a table for being plus size. Another had sat down and called her his treasure. And by the time his enemy understood what she was, she had turned an entire fortress against him and walked out of the dark untouched. If Serafina and Gabriel's story of hidden worth, public triumph, and hard-won vindication moved you, if your heart lifted when the Mafia boss sat down at that empty table and told the whole room his loss is my treasure, then do us a small favor before you go. Smash that like button right now. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that the space they take up was never the thing that made them less. Subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss another twist-filled tale of the overlooked soul who finally gets everything she deserves. And drop a comment below and tell us what was your favorite moment in Serafina and Gabriel's story.